Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin. Thank you all so much for joining me today for this podcast. So this is going to be a question and answer based episode. So I've got a couple of questions from the email list that I'm going to be answering today on a couple of different topics. So I think this is actually going to be pretty good, pretty broad, pretty open. So if you would like your question answered on a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can send me a message over there through the submit a question link. You can also go over to Instagram. I am at fearcastpodcast over at the Instagrams, and you can send me a message over there, send me a DM and record your voice. You can also email me a recording over at questions@fearcastpodcast.com. All these different ways to send me questions and get your question on the podcast. Today, I'm going to be answering two questions, one from Jake and one from Ruth. Both of these folks have kindly shared their question about their struggles, and I'm going to be going over those in just a moment. But first off, I know I mentioned this on a previous episode. If you are setting up to go to the IOCDF, I hope you all have a great time. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it, but for those of you who are interested, go check it out. If you are in Orlando, if you are looking to get more information about OCD and anxiety treatment, go check out the IOCDF National Conference. Additionally, wherever you are, go to the IOCDF. It's the International OCD Foundation, and look for a local affiliate. So here we have OCD SoCal. There are affiliates all over the country, and they often hold local events, smaller conferences, just general fun kind of meetups where you get to meet other people, meet other clinicians, meet family members, meet other people who are living with OCD and other anxiety disorders for that matter. But it's a great place to get connected and to feel the connection and know that there is a community out there of supportive people, like-minded people who can be there for you and who can help point you in the right direction, and just so that you don't feel like you are out there alone and struggling by yourself. So I think that's one of the best things about the IOCDF. It's one of the things that the conference does really well, and especially if you get involved in one of your local affiliates, it can really punctuate that point for you. So I unfortunately, due to a family thing, I had to miss the OCD walk this year. I love going to that. We usually meet down in Costa Mesa, and we'll have to miss it this year. But hopefully I'll be able to go next year, and I'll be able to answer some questions there and just kind of meet some folks. But if you would like to get involved, go look for local affiliates, and that can be a great way to get connected. All right. So why don't we jump into some questions? Okay, so first question comes from Jake. Jake says, "Hello, I've really enjoyed your podcast in the past and feel it has helped me with my sexual orientation OCD, SO-OCD. However, I kind of hit a point of frustration and realized that I was using this podcast and really anything online as reassurance that, quote, it's SO-OCD and that I'm not gay. I decided to completely stop reading online, doing research, and looking at OCD books, and simply doing home exposures." Then he goes on to say, "This seems to be working out most of the time. I feel great and have minimal intrusive thoughts. However, when I start feeling healthy again, I fear that these thoughts are going to start coming back, and they slowly tend to. Also, it seems like my girlfriend is the biggest trigger of these thoughts and feelings. However, she is the most amazing girl ever, and I really see a future with her. It's just tough because when I do get to be with her, this is when the thoughts seem to come back. My question to you is, what do you recommend to prevent this relapse when in a good mental spot? And what would you recommend to help with my doubtful feelings when with my girlfriend? I realize you probably get a ton of questions, but thanks again. Really appreciate it. All right, Jake, thank you for this question. This is such a universal question for folks with anxiety and folks with OCD. Is that and this could be any subtype. I know you were specifically asking about sexual orientation OCD, but really it could be anything. I've certainly worked with folks where they think things are doing great, right? Life is going well. They've worked on their OCD. They've met with a therapist. Maybe they haven't. They've done stuff in workbooks, and they've gotten to a really workable, functional place. And then their brain goes, yeah, but what if all that progress goes away? Then what? Or what if it all comes rushing back? Or what if it turns into something else? It's incredibly frustrating. I hear you on that. Furthermore, so first, actually, before I even get into that, I want to acknowledge, good for you. Good on you for being aware that you are using this podcast and other resources online as reassurances. Man, this is one of the most frustrating things for me as a podcaster, educator, content creator, whatever you want to call me. I try to put out good information. I hope it's good information. I think it is. I know other people are trying to put out good information as best they possibly can, and that's what it's there for. But any tool, any technique that we can do for therapy to get better can also be used as reassurance, can also be used as compulsion. So good for you for being aware that you are starting to use this podcast and other resources as a reassurance machine. This idea of like, okay, I read this information. It sounds like me. So you know what? It means that I'm not gay. It means that it's this OCD thing. Oh, good. Right? In other words, you're not trying to answer a question, you're trying to answer a feeling. And that is one of the biggest things that I think everyone out there should start to be aware of, right? I'm happy to answer questions. Obviously, I love to answer questions. What's interesting is I'm recording this from the past, I suppose. It's I'm recording this on the day on my daughter's birthday, and oddly enough, 6 years ago, that was when I released, or maybe it's the day before. I should look this up. Right around then when my daughter was born. So it's been a long time. Obviously, I like answering questions. I want good information to be out there. But I also know that people can use that good information that can point them in a right direction and a helpful direction can be used ultimately nefariously by OCD to get reassurance. And that just perpetuates the cycle. So the fact that you caught yourself in that and resisted is a big stinking deal, right? So take that for everybody else listening. Everybody's listening. If you find yourself doing that and saying, okay, I got my anxiety. You know what I should do? I need to do my alternative thought records. I need to write a script right now because I'm really anxious. Oftentimes when you're doing that, I would say most times, if that's your response, I'm anxious, so I have to go do my tool. I have to go do my exercise, right? If you're doing that so that your anxiety goes away, oftentimes what you're doing is giving into a compulsion. And information is important, right? I want you guys to be able to ask questions and get some information. But if you're asking the same question, if you're trying to revisit a bit of information because it made you feel a certain way the time before, that's a compulsion, right? We want to be able to internalize the information that you received and then put it into practice, right? And put it into practice and maybe you do it wrong. And that's a big fear. That's a quote, big danger, according to OCD, is that maybe you're going to implement it wrong, maybe you learned it wrong, maybe you thought about it wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So trust yourself and take a risk. And maybe it goes weird. Maybe it doesn't. But if you find yourself falling into that trap, resist. All right, you've done this. Now let's get on to your question. So I love this question because, let's see, where can I get a specific question? Here we go. Question to this. All right. What do you recommend to prevent the relapse when in a good mental spot? So first off, we aren't trying to stop relapses. Now, there's a difference. There is a little bit of a difference between a lapse and a relapse. So this is I don't know, maybe it's a silly definition. Anyways, I'm going to do it anyways. People have lapses. People make mistakes. People have hiccups in their recovery. And this is recovery for any sort of symptom or any sort of subtype and any sort of thing that we're trying to change. There's a lapse. Now that means you went back and let's say you ran some old programming. You went back and you did a compulsion when you've been, quote, clean from it. You've been resisting it. You've been abstinent from doing your compulsions for a long time. Awesome. Doing a compulsion from time to time isn't the end of the world. It's a lapse. Now, it's also to be expected. I'm not going to beat you up about it, nor is any other therapist in the world going to beat you up for it, because it's expected. You'll have a hiccup every now and again. There's a great article by John Hirschfeld. I'd encourage everybody to read it. It's something like, I'll just look it up. I have it saved over here. This is where you guys get to hear me just make mumble sounds. I've talked about it before. It is called Having No Cure for OCD is the Cure. I think it's a great article because it basically talks about how you can anticipate that there are going to be hiccups and relapses, and that's okay. What you were building instead isn't full abstinence. It is resiliency. It is having a hiccup and bouncing back. It becomes a relapse when that lapse continues and continues, and you keep doing it, and it starts to overtake your life, right? Doing a compulsion every now and again, not because you're trying to be loosey-goosey about it, but because it catches you. Like, yeah, it's gonna. That's where I want you, Jake, to apply compassion. I want you to apply understanding and acceptance to yourself. And and I'm kind of pulling this from the article as well. It's kind of like, all right, you got me this time, OCD, but I'm going to get you next time. Right? I'll often tell clients, and this is like specific to like contamination obsessions. Like sometimes folks will, like let's say they're a minor compulsion is they like dust their hands off on their shirt, right? They kind of tap them down, or maybe they're washing and then they kind of they finish their washing, they sing their birthday song or whatever it is, and they touch the doorknob and they go, I'm just going to do it again. And they wash themselves real quick, or they just do like a quick rinse off, right? And they kind of get out the door. That's a lapse, right? OCD got the best of you at that time. Now, when that happens, we're not going to beat yourself up. You caught me. Oops. You can always go back and recontaminate. Meaning, touch the bottom of your shoes, touch the doorknob again, touch the walls, touch a light switch, right? Put your hands in the dirt, rub it on your face, something to that effect. You can always do something, right? If you find yourself doing a compulsion, like let's say, let's say you quote, you fell into, you accidentally, I Googled, coming out stories just to verify. I listened to that Fearcast podcast episode again about sexual orientation OCD, and listened to Chris Tronston be fantastic about talking about sexual orientation OCD. Oh, oops, I did that again. Well, it's not the end of the world. You can say, it caught me. I was anxious. And I fell back into old programming, and then say, but you know what? Just because I feel better doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Doesn't mean I can't. Doesn't mean this is what's going to be there forever. And it could still be true, maybe. And you move on, or you say something that helps you to lean into that fear again, and then you move on with your day. Get on with your life. So those are some so what we're talking about here again is we're trying to build resiliency for these hiccups, and trusting yourself that you can get yourself moving and you can get yourself back on track. So you're also talking about, let's see here. So, and what do you recommend to help with my doubtful feelings when with my girlfriend? Acceptance and redirection. You might have doubtful feelings. Now, again, those doubtful feelings, there can be general doubts within relationships. There can be differences within relationships that make it seem that are, in fact, you two not being on the same page with something. And we call that relationships. Now, there's a big difference between observing something that is a difference between you two and it being a disqualifying characteristic or a disqualifying thing for the relationship at large. But sometimes you might get those doubtful feelings, and I'm willing to bet those doubtful feelings that you're talking about are related or are symptoms of and manifestations of OCD. And if they are, practice accepting that those are some of those feelings that are typically going to show up. And it's not because it's a failure, but it's because she is a trigger, and it's activating that same old thought, that same old mental, or that same old thought process. And you can say, that's okay. And even say, yep, there it is. I knew it was going to be there. Well, let's go have a terrible relationship, or let's go back to my fake relationship. I don't know if anxiety is attacking you as, I'm only with this girl because I'm trying to trick myself or trick other people into thinking that I'm straight. So so she's my beard. I'm hiding behind her, and I'm going to go make this the best bearded relationship that I possibly can. Right? So I know some of this can feel uncomfortable, and good. That's okay. We're building resiliency to the anxiety, but we're not debating with OCD again. So another thing to consider, Jake, is that when I'm really glad that you are doing a lot of self-exposure, self-guided exposure through the books and workbooks and other resources. So something that happens for some folks, not saying you do this, but people do this, is that they go through treatment and things go really well, and they find they do a bunch of these tools and exercises and experiments and exposures and all that stuff. And then once they're out, they go, well, I'm done doing those things, and they get on with their life. And then they find they slowly start to creep back into their old habits. Now, this might be you, this might not be you, but if this is you, like it is with a lot of people, I recommend this. Be consistent with exposure. Still continually do exposures. And for some people that may be, they have a book that they put together of all their scripts, and every day they just read through them. Or every day they have an audio recording of one of their exposures. And once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, they listen to it on their drive to work. They listen to it on the bus to go to school. They listen to it at the gym, whatever it may be. They incorporate that into their life. Some people will for you, Jake, it may be that during June you go to a Pride event. Now that would be a big exposure, but let's remember that there's a gradient of things that you can do and should do as part of your life. We're trying to build a new relationship with anxiety and with this fear, and practicing leaning into things that feel uncomfortable and being consistent with it. So doing these small things on a regular basis, listening to scripts, maybe just simply having a pride flag up can be helpful. Watching TV shows where there happen to be gay characters on them. These are just simple things that you can do throughout your life that's going to kind of kick up that thought. Now, there can be medium level exposures that you can do, and maybe that's going to be watching a longer movie that's specifically focusing on the LGBT community. Netflix is a whole category of that, and just watch one of those. And maybe that's something you do once a week. Maybe that's something you do once a month. And then again, some of those bigger things, you go to Pride, something like that. Now, you can work that out with your therapist, or you can kind of think about this gradient. But having these as like small weekly, maybe twice a month, and there's maybe like once every 6 months bigger exposures that you can do. And I want everybody who's listening to this who's not struggling with sexual orientation OCD, think about this for your thing, whatever it is. What's the small thing that you can do every single day? What is the medium thing that you can do twice a month? And what is the larger thing that you can do every 6 months? So start thinking about that, and then start implementing that just into your regular routine. It helps to create this atmosphere that you can face and are facing your fear, so that randomly when it pops up, it's not a big giant surprise. It is old news. So, Jake, I hope that was helpful. I really appreciate your question, and I hope this is helpful for your process. All right, so let's move on to Ruth's question. Ruth's question says, I discovered your podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm hooked. I've realized that I'm suffering from Real Event OCD, and it's hitting me hard after leaving an abusive friendship. My OCD convinces me that I deserve to be treated this way because of the past event. I'm too afraid to share the past event with any of my family or friends for fear of being completely rejected. However, I'm waiting for the person I possibly hurt to expose me to my family. The person once found out that I thought that I had irreparably hurt them, and they laughed and said I was insane. The event happened when I was a teenager, and I keep trying to convince myself that I didn't have bad motives at the time, and I'm waiting for the individual to expose me after remembering it. I want to talk about this with a therapist, but I'm so afraid that the therapist will think that I'm a terrible individual and report me. And then they go on to say, is there a chance that this could happen if a potentially egregious situation was shared with an OCD specialist? All right. Ruth, thank you for this question. I'm sorry you're having to go through that. Real Event OCD, along with all the other subtypes, can just be just devastating, and they persist with you for all these years. And one of the big parts of Real Event OCD is that there is an actual event. There's a thing that happened that anxiety points to and says, see, because of this, you are disqualified. Because of this, you are ruined. Your future is ruined. Whatever you have right now in life doesn't matter, whatever it might be, but it points back to this thing. Right? A lot of times with other subtypes, there isn't a thing to point to. There is a maybe, a kinda, a what if I could become, what if I did think, what if I did do, but in this, it's I did something. So, Ruth, I don't know what you did, and you didn't really specify that, and that's fine. But one thing that I would encourage you to do is one, if you are you're considering working with a therapist, I would highly encourage you to work with a therapist on this. Now, there are going to be some. I'm so hesitant to say. I'll say it anyways. There are obviously going to be some things that if you do tell a therapist that they can be reportable, depending on the state, depending on the country, depending on where you are, what you're talking about. There are some things that can be reportable. Here in California, it's if someone comes to me and says that there's any child abuse or elderly abuse, or somebody is having a real deal thoughts of harming themselves or somebody else, I'll have to tell someone. And there are a couple other little things smattered about in there, but those are the general kind of broad things. But then I'd have to tell somebody. But oftentimes when I work with folks with real event OCD, there's a perception that the thing they're struggling with is a big deal and is a bigger deal than it perhaps actually is. It's something that I would encourage you to go and take the risk and meet with a therapist to help process this. Meet with an OCD-specific therapist, and when you call them, ask them what their understanding of real event OCD is, how they treat real event OCD, and what they would do in case something was egregious like this. To feel if you feel kind of confident with how they respond and how they treat you. What you're looking for is someone who is compassionate, who is encouraging, who's supportive, who seems to be understanding, and who seems to be able to not be reactive or responsive, I'm looking for the right word. Maybe just overly reactive or judgy, for that matter, right? If you feel kind of comfortable with them, take the risk. And you can kind of share little bits of information, but then eventually tell them. And you can talk to them about your concern about it being reportable and it being reported if this were to happen. Now, I'll say this. I really haven't had any situation in the past where someone has come to me with real event and it has in fact been I've needed to report. Oftentimes it is something where it's of concern, but it doesn't actually happen. So I don't know your situation, but I'd encourage you to take the risk anyways, because here's the alternative. You can continue to ruminate about this for the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Is it worth it? I maybe not, right? To you it is, or to you it may or may not be. But it sounds like you'd be signing yourself up for the prison that you're already in. And you're obviously feeling bad enough that you messaged me, and I appreciate that you did. And I'd encourage you to take that risk. Reach out, tell them. Now, regarding the rest of this, though, so when we work with Real Event OCD, what I'm oftentimes looking for is, like, where are the compulsions? What are the ruminations? What are the things about it that they can actually make any changes about? Like, is there anything in that story that is something they can take ownership of and take responsibility for, right? We need to own our nonsense, own our mistakes, or own our failures. And it's not because it makes us a failure, but because it makes us a responsible adult who owns and acknowledges where we messed up. Because when we point out where we messed up, we can also acknowledge how we can change. It's a reflection of our values. It says, I didn't do this the way that I would like to, according to who I want to be, who I'm striving to be, who I'm striving to become. And I can do better. And I want to do better. So it's when we take ownership of it. And maybe that means we reach out and we apologize. It means that we try to make amends some sort of way. Now, sometimes it's impossible for us to do an amends fully. Or it would be unreasonable for us to reach out to the person or people that we've harmed. In which case, in that case, it may be because by doing that, it would actually cause more harm, more damage, more of a problem. And that's what we're not trying to do any of that. What we're trying to do is for you to take ownership of that and to move forward with it. So sometimes that can be sometimes it can be making an apology to the person who you harmed. All right. And once you do that, you need to intentionally let yourself off the hook. And that means resisting that continual rumination about what you did. Forgive yourself. And forgiveness, again, I know I've shared this in the past. I like the definition of forgiveness, which is no longer seeking punishment towards yourself or somebody else for harms done. That means you resist beating yourself up. It means you resist withholding good things from yourself. It means that you let yourself go have joy and excitement and passion and opportunity, right? You let yourself be human again. Now, sometimes if you can't do that reasonably, you might need to do a living amends, which means you might need to intentionally make a choice to do something different in life and to put that into practice. So maybe it means, if there was some type of emotional hurt or some type of, lying to somebody or something to that effect, making a commitment towards honesty and putting that into practice as often as you possibly can, and being honest, not being, that quote, brutally honest where you're trying to hurt someone's feelings, etc., but like, striving to be truthful and trying to be honest with other people around you and yourself for that matter. Now, one of the ways that you can let yourself off the hook is by letting go of the effort, meaning letting go of the active effort to try to reflect back and do those mental compulsions of trying to figure out what your motives were when you were a teenager. Now, I don't know how old you are now, but we are unable to reasonably ascertain all of our motives at the time we did something back in the day. Now, we did things for reasons. You did this for a reason, and I don't know fully why, but teenager you had her reasons. Would you be able to extend compassion to teenager you and maybe say, man, you were scared, you were worried, you were afraid, you were angry, you were something, you felt something at the time that led you to take this action, to say these things, to do these things. And you made a mistake. You miscalculated. You didn't take everything into account. You were short-sighted, whatever it might be. But to give that version of you grace and understanding and patience and forgiveness, to say that maybe even teenager you can make a mistake, but can commit to being better, commit to doing better next time. And what this does is it takes you out of that shame place of I'm this bad and broken and awful human, and I have been and always will be. And it says, you know what? I messed up and I had a lapse of judgment, and I can do better, and I will do better in these ways. And then commit to putting that into practice moving forward. lastly, I'll say, I'm so sorry that you had that experience where you shared this with someone and they just laughed at you. Now, when I read that, I hear that as that person heard you, they heard what you said, they heard the situation, and they didn't think it was as big of a deal as you are, or they didn't think that it is as egregious as you are perceiving it to be. Sometimes in the middle of our anxiety or our anger or our depression, we feel things bigger and we misperceive a situation in any number of reasons, in any number of ways, rather. I know that I've been there, and I'm willing to bet you and everybody else has too. So, one thing that we can do is we can rely on the rationale of other people. When I'm working with someone to challenge their intrusive thoughts, sometimes I'll ask the question, I'll say, who's the most logical, reasonable, and rational person you know? And they'll be like, my mom, my dad, my cousin, my partner, whoever it is. And I'll say, all right, if you were to share this with that person, what do you think they would say? And they, oftentimes they say they'd say I'm ridiculous, or they say I've shared this with them, and they say that, it's not that bad, or I'm okay, or it's safe. And I go, do you think that they would lie to you? Do you think they're trying to deceive you? No. Okay. What would it be like, and what would be different in your life if you trusted what they said? If they were indeed actually the most logical, reasonable, rational, grounded person in your life. And it can help to open up a different possibility of response and a different way to view the event and yourself. So, I know it's some stuff to further process with your therapist, but Ruth, I really appreciate this question. I know this was hard to send in, but I hope this was helpful in guiding you towards a different way to relate to yourself and your past. So you got this. And if you have further questions, feel free to reach out again. I'd love to hear a follow-up. I know this question was from a little while ago, but if you are listening, send in a follow-up. Say how you're doing. Say what's going on. So, all right, everybody, I'll leave you here today, and thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.